It's May 1942, somewhere high above northern France. The thin, silver morning light glints off the wings of a supermarine Spitfire Mk V, slicing through thin wisps of cloud. Inside the cramped cockpit, the pilot's breath fogs his oxygen mask. Sweat runs down beneath his helmet. Every sound, the engine's strained hum, the rattle of metal, feels amplified in the endless blue. Then, from the sun's glare, a flash. Two Messerschmitt Bf 109s diving fast. The pilot's heart races. He knows the odds. The German fighters hold altitude, speed, and surprise. One mistake means death, but instead of diving or turning, he stays level. His hand shifts slightly to a small rectangular mirror, crudely fixed to the cockpit canopy. He angles it, just so. The image catches a shape behind him, the reflection of the enemy closing in. In that split second, he rolls left, fires, and the hunter becomes the hunted. The Luftwaffe pilot never sees it coming. A simple piece of glass, saving a man's life, and soon changing how Allied pilots fought in the skies. By early 1942, the skies over Europe were no longer Britain's shield. They were its front line. After the triumph of the Battle of Britain in 1940, many assumed the worst had passed, that the Luftwaffe had been broken. But the reality was far harsher. The German Air Force had not vanished. It had shifted strategy. The Luftwaffe adapted its reach, focusing on coastal raids, hit-and-run attacks over the English Channel, and deadly sweeps across occupied France and the Low Countries. For RAF pilots, every patrol was now a game of patience and nerves. Air combat in 1942 was uneven and unpredictable. The Luftwaffe's Bf 109F and FW 190 fighters outclimbed and outdove most British aircraft. Their cannons struck with lethal precision. They controlled altitude, dictating when and where battles began. The Spitfire Mk V, the RAF's workhorse, was a masterpiece of engineering but had limitations. Visibility was among its greatest weaknesses. The cockpit's narrow frame and elongated fuselage created blind spots large enough to hide entire enemy aircraft. Pilots could not easily see directly behind them, the angle most often exploited by German aces. To compensate, Allied flyers developed a ritual known as the weaving pattern. Every few seconds, they rocked their planes gently side to side, scanning the sky in an endless motion. It was tiring, distracting, and far from foolproof. One lapse in rhythm, 1 second of stillness, and the hunter behind you became executioner. The RAF called it the unseen death. Most pilots never saw the tracers that killed them. Training manuals stressed vigilance above all. Squadron briefings hammered in the mantra, "Keep your eyes moving." But in practice, exhaustion and glare made it nearly impossible. Long sorties, sometimes 3 or 4 per day, left pilots drained. Their eyes watered from wind and sunlight. Their necks ached from constant twisting. In the Luftwaffe, many German aces like Adolf Galland and Werner Mulders boasted kill counts that climbed into the hundreds. They struck from the sun or cloud banks, ambushing less experienced opponents. Their skill was lethal, but so too was the element of surprise, something Allied pilots had no reliable countermeasure against. The RAF's tactical air forces and fighter command began seeking answers. Engineers experimented with new canopy designs, panoramic glass, and even periscopes, but these prototypes were months, sometimes years, away from mass production. In the meantime, the war demanded improvisation. Every pilot carried small comforts and odd trinkets in the cockpit. A photograph, a lucky charm, a compass modification, or a small shaving mirror. These fragments of humanity accompanied them into the chaos of combat. And it was from one such object, a simple mirror, fixed at just the right angle, that an idea was born. Some say it first appeared in No. 303 Squadron, the Polish fighter unit famed for its daring. Others trace it to a handful of RAF veterans who had survived the Battle of Britain and refused to die blind. The official records never named a single inventor, because the trick spread like rumor, whispered from one ready room to another. what mattered wasn't who thought of it first. What mattered was that it worked. A mirror, mounted to the canopy frame or even held by hand, allowed pilots to see what radar could not. A fleeting glint of sunlight off an approaching wing, a dark shadow against the clouds, a threat just seconds away. It was crude, yes, but in the fragile balance between life and death at 20,000 feet, it offered a priceless advantage. Vision, and vision in the skies of 1942 was survival itself. That quiet evolution in cockpit awareness would soon reshape how Allied pilots thought, flew, and fought, turning improvisation into innovation. The air war was changing again, and this time it was shifting not through factories or command orders, but through the ingenuity of individual men in cramped cockpits, learning to adapt faster than their enemies. By the summer of 1942, the Allied air war had become a vast, complex machine. Thousands of sorties every month across Western Europe, the Mediterranean, and North Africa. The RAF and newly arrived USAF units faced an enemy that had perfected the art of the ambush. The Luftwaffe, hunted in small formations known as Rote or Schwarm, pairs or groups of 4, fighters that coordinated like predators. The lead aircraft attacked while the wingman covered his tail, their fluid movement giving German pilots tactical superiority. They dove from altitude, struck with precision, and disappeared before Allied squadrons could react. This dynamic made vision, the simple act of seeing first, the most decisive factor in survival. But vision, in a fighter cockpit, was a cruel limitation. The human eye, strained against sunlight, vibration, and windscreen glare, could barely detect motion beyond a few hundred yards. The sun itself became a weapon. German pilots used it mercilessly, diving out of its blinding radiance to mask their approach. It was here, amid the chaos of daily missions, that the so-called mirror trick began to spread. At first, it was a field modification, done quietly and without official sanction. Pilots scavenged mirrors from personal kits or mechanics' benches, anything reflective enough to offer a rear view. A small rectangular glass, often from a motorbike or shaving mirror, was fixed using tape, wire, or improvised mounts to the upper canopy frame. In some squadrons, ground crews began pre-installing them before flights, not as part of regulation, but as a courtesy, a token of protection. Within weeks, more and more cockpits bore a small glinting square catching the morning light. It was not elegant, but it was effective. The mirror allowed a pilot to maintain formation while still keeping an eye behind. No more constant weaving or exhausting neck twists. The blind spot that had claimed so many lives was suddenly visible. For the first time since the Battle of Britain, RAF pilots began to feel a measure of control. Reports filtered back through debriefings. Enemy aircraft breaking off sooner, surprise attacks detected earlier, engagements turning in favor of the defenders. At first, the Luftwaffe dismissed these changes as coincidence, but by late summer, German pilots began filing their own reports. "Tommy seems to know when we are coming. They turn before we fire." What was once a predictable ambush had turned into an uncertain contest. The RAF command noticed the improvement. By late 1942, Air Chief Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory authorized limited trials for integrated rear-view mirrors in the Spitfire Mk V and the Hawker Typhoon. What had begun as a small act of field ingenuity was about to become standardized wartime equipment. It was a triumph of adaptation, but also of psychology, because the mirror didn't just reveal enemies, it restored confidence. Pilots began to trust their instincts again, to push forward into combat without feeling blind. This newfound morale translated into tactical aggression. The RAF, once primarily defensive, started to go on the offensive, escorting bombers deep into occupied territory. The Luftwaffe, sensing the shift, responded in kind. Their pilots began experimenting with new angles of approach, diving from steeper altitudes, using cloud cover, and even removing cockpit armor to gain a few extra miles per hour in pursuit. Yet the mirror remained a small but stubborn obstacle to their dominance. From the German perspective, it was baffling. How could such a simple modification, a fragment of glass, upset years of hard-earned air superiority? The truth lay not in the mirror itself, but in what it represented: the mindset of adaptation. The Allies were learning that innovation didn't always come from laboratories or high command. Sometimes, it came from the desperate creativity of a single man under fire. By late 1942, photographs from RAF maintenance units showed the glint of standardized rear-view mirrors mounted on nearly every Spitfire canopy. American P-51 Mustangs, entering service soon after, would feature them as built-in design elements. A small change, but one born from necessity. It was not a technological revolution, but a psychological one. A single reflection turned fear into awareness, and awareness into survival. As the Allied squadrons crossed deeper into enemy skies, the mirror became more than a tool. It became a symbol, a sign that even amid mechanical war, human ingenuity still mattered. And that ingenuity, that quiet defiance of inevitability, is where our next chapter begins. War in the air is often remembered through machines: the roar of engines, the precision of guns, the silhouettes of fighters against the sun. But beneath the machinery, victory always began in the mind. Air combat in the 1940s was a contest of vision. Whoever saw first struck first. The mirror gave the RAF pilot that edge, not by transforming the aircraft, but by transforming situational awareness. Before its introduction, RAF fighters relied heavily on radar control and radio calls to warn of approaching threats. Ground stations would vector squadrons toward enemy formations, but once engaged, the pilot was largely alone. With a mirror fixed overhead, that isolation lessened. Pilots could maintain formation discipline without constant weaving. Their attention remained forward, scanning for targets rather than nervously glancing back. The change was subtle, but decisive. Combat reports from late 1942 show that pilots equipped with mirrors were less likely to be surprised by diving attackers. The Luftwaffe's favored bounce, the sudden dive from altitude, began to fail. German aces noticed the shift. "They turn before we dive," one noted in frustration. Every failed ambush forced the Luftwaffe to engage in turning dogfights, something the Spitfire excelled at. What had once been an asymmetric contest was beginning to even out. In a sense, the mirror rewrote the unwritten rule of air combat, that no one could ever truly watch their own back. Now the hunter had to think twice before attacking. Though crude at first, the mirror trick reflected a deeper truth about wartime technology: that progress often begins with desperation. British engineers at Supermarine and Hawker began studying these field modifications closely. Pilots who had installed mirrors were interviewed. Angles and reflections were measured. By 1943, Spitfire Mk Vs rolled off the line with factory-mounted rear-view mirrors, complete with adjustable brackets to eliminate glare. What started as a piece of taped glass had become part of industrial design. The innovation spread beyond Britain. American aircraft, the P-47 Thunderbolt, P-38 Lightning, and P-51 Mustang, all incorporated mirrors into their cockpits. Even Soviet fighters like the Yak-9 adopted similar configurations by late 1943, across nations and theaters. The principle was the same. In a three-dimensional battlefield where seconds decided life or death, vision was the ultimate weapon. It wasn't the first time small innovations had reshaped the skies. During the First World War, the synchronization gear that allowed machine guns to fire through propeller blades had done the same, turning survival into dominance. The mirror joined that lineage. Small, mechanical, yet transformative. Behind every great technological leap lies a moment of human clarity. A decision made not in comfort, but in chaos. The pilot who first fixed that mirror to his canopy didn't think of innovation. He thought of survival. The air war over France and the Channel was relentless. Pilots were often barely in their 20s, flying multiple sorties a day, losing friends faster than replacements arrived. They were told to be vigilant, to never stop looking. But vigilance has limits. Fatigue, glare, vibration. They wore down even the best-trained eyes. In that exhaustion, a small mirror became salvation. Psychologists later studying combat fatigue in pilots noted how control perception, the feeling of awareness, directly affected performance. Those who believed they could anticipate danger performed better, lasted longer, and panicked less. The mirror gave them that sense of control. It was not just a tool. It was a comfort, a reassurance that death wouldn't always come unseen. Many pilots described it later with affection, calling it their guardian eye. To them, it was proof that survival was still partly in their hands, or in this case, reflected just above their heads. And in a war dominated by radar, radio, and mass production, that sliver of human adaptability stood as a quiet defiance, a reminder that innovation could still be personal. The mirror trick was not glamorous. It didn't earn headlines or medals, but it saved lives, one sortie at a time, and its legacy would ripple far beyond the war itself. By late 1942, what began as a rumor among squadrons had turned into a tactical movement. But innovation never exists in isolation. It invites reaction. And as the Allies learned to see what once had been invisible, the Luftwaffe began to change how it fought, seeking new ways to regain the unseen advantage. That adaptation, and the escalating duel of wits in the sky, forms the next part of this story. For the Luftwaffe, the air war had always been about control. From 1939 to 1941, their pilots dictated when and how to fight. They struck unseen, disengaged at will, and trusted their tactical doctrine, boom and zoom, to dominate slower or less experienced foes. But by late 1942, something was changing. In combat diaries and interrogation reports from captured German pilots, a pattern emerged. Allied fighters seemed harder to surprise. Ambushes were failing. Formations reacted quicker. Luftwaffe intelligence officers at Jagdgeschwader 26, JG-26, one of Germany's elite fighter wings, began noting premature evasive actions by RAF pilots, turns, dives and climbs that occurred seconds before German gunners could fire. It wasn't luck. Some German airmen initially believed the Allies had developed new radar or radio warning systems. Others blamed leaks in radio channels or unseen spotters on the ground. Only later did captured aircraft and gun camera footage reveal the truth. Small, glinting mirrors perched atop the canopies. The reaction was a mixture of disbelief and irritation. To them, it was absurd that such a humble object could deny their dominance. German engineers began discussing counter-tactics, attacking from lower angles, where mirrors reflected only sky, using blind spot approaches, even modifying paint schemes to reduce reflection. Some Luftwaffe squadrons instructed their aces to attack mirror-fitted aircraft with deflection shots or from vertical climbs, risky maneuvers that demanded flawless timing. The mirror trick, though tiny in scale, had begun to reshape enemy behavior. Inside the RAF, morale was as crucial as machinery. Pilots lived on a knife's edge. Every day a blend of adrenaline, fatigue, and loss. By 1942, the average operational life expectancy for a frontline fighter pilot was measured in weeks. In that fragile world, even a small improvement, a change that gave one more second of warning, carried immense psychological weight. Veteran pilots began to notice it first. They felt more confident maintaining level flight, less consumed by paranoia. That composure translated into accuracy, better aim, steadier hands. Younger pilots, too, adopted it eagerly. Squadron briefings began including instructions on mirror positioning, how to angle it against sunlight, and how to adjust for glare. In hangars, mechanics wiped each mirror clean before takeoff, a small ritual of hope before another deadly sortie. To outsiders, it might have seemed trivial, but among men who measured their lives in seconds, a single glimpse could be the difference between living and vanishing into smoke. It was this emotional shift, from reactive fear to measured confidence, that began tipping the psychological balance. The RAF, once cornered and defensive, was regaining initiative. And when morale rises, performance follows. Statistics from mid-1943 show a steady decline in Luftwaffe kill ratios over Western Europe, from 4.1 in 1941 to near parity by the year's end. The mirror alone didn't cause that reversal, but it symbolized a broader pattern. Learning faster, adapting quicker. Every war produces its silent symbols, things that define not what was fought for, but how it was fought. The mirror was one of them. It captured something essential about human nature under pressure, the instinct to adapt when resources fail. In a world where machines grew faster and weapons deadlier, the smallest piece of glass represented human intellect still guiding the machine. It wasn't about technology. It was about the refusal to be predictable. Pilots often described the sensation of seeing an enemy appear in the mirror. They said it felt almost supernatural, as if they'd been given foresight. That half-second of advantage wasn't just tactical. It was emotional, empowering, and this empowerment spread beyond the cockpit. Engineers began thinking differently about design, about visibility, ergonomics, and pilot comfort. Post-war aircraft would carry this philosophy forward. From the bubble canopies of the late-war P-51 and Spitfire Mk V to the panoramic views of jet fighters like the Meteor and Sabre. It all began with that idea. That awareness equals survival. The Mirror War, though never officially recorded as a campaign, became an invisible duel between two mentalities. The Luftwaffe, structured and disciplined, relied on doctrine, hierarchy, and technology refined through experience. The Allies, decentralized and improvisational, thrived on field innovation and individual adaptation. The mirror stood between these two philosophies, a reflection, literally and symbolically, of how wars evolve not through power alone, but through perception. By the time the Allies launched Operation Point Blank in 1943, the strategic bombing campaign that would cripple Germany's air defenses, the Luftwaffe was already on the defensive. Pilots who once dictated combat now found themselves guessing, second-guessing, reacting instead of acting. The mirror hadn't won the war, but it had shifted its tempo, a few seconds at a time, across thousands of sorties, and those seconds, multiplied by courage, ingenuity, and survival, began shaping the outcome of the skies. As 1943 approached, the war in the air entered a new phase, one defined not by invention alone, but by confrontation. The Luftwaffe would strike back with ferocity, determined to regain the unseen advantage they'd lost.